In this video, we're going to step through the process of setting up a working quit button in Unity. We're going to start from a place with the button already created. If you need extra help with that, there are videos previous to this one that go through the process of setting up your canvas, button, and project. So if you need to review those, please do that. But we're going to start with a button already created in the scene so that we can just work on setting up the script and then hooking the script up to the button. First things first, we're going to create our script. So I already have a scripts folder, and inside of here I'm going to create a new script by just right-clicking, choosing Create C# Script, and I'm just going to name this one UI Controller so that I know that this is controlling UI elements. And then I'm going to double click it to open up the script in Visual Studio. Once you have Visual Studio open, there are two things you should check right away. The first one is that this should say Assembly C#, and notice that mine does not say Assembly C#. If it doesn't say that, it's possible that it just desynced when you were opening up the first time, and depending on how you opened it, it might also slightly desync. So the first thing I would try, if this isn't working, this doesn't say Assembly C#, is to close Visual Studio and then reopen it again by double clicking on your C# script. And when it loads, let's see what it says. Notice it now says Assembly C# when I opened it up a second time, so that means that Visual Studio is talking correctly to Unity. If this says miscellaneous, you're going to run into issues with some stuff, so always double check that. The second thing you should check when you open up a new script is that the name here, right here where it says UI Controller, it needs to match exactly the name of the script file. So same capitalization, no, there should never be any spaces. So, and you can see it right here, it needs to match perfectly. If it doesn't match perfectly, you need to either alter it here or make the change here so that it does, or you're going to run into errors when you go back to Unity. So once you got everything checked, ready to go, we can then come in and program that quit button. So we're going to write a new button click event. This is a real simple project, so we don't need our start and we don't need our update. I'm actually going to highlight and delete those out. And I'm going to write a new function here. It's going to be public, and it does have to be public. If we don't make this a public event, we won't be able to hook it up in Unity. So one of the first things to check, if you can't hook it up correctly, make sure you made your button click event public. So public void, and I'm going to name this one on quit button click, parentheses, and then semicolon. Keep in mind that this isn't a very specific name, this on quit button click. This is a name that I came up with. We could name these events whatever we want. We could call it event 1, we could call it event purple, but you really want to name them something that's obvious. Like, what is this event doing? Or when does this event occur? This occurs when the quit button is clicked, and it's going to run this code. So that's one of the questions I get asked a lot with beginner programmers is, where did I come up with this name? Like, is that a very specific name? And the answer is no. In this event, for this particular event, you can call it whatever you want, but make sure that the name that you choose makes sense for when it's supposed to happen. With that said, I do want to leave a comment to myself, because you should be commenting your code on what this event does. And I'm going to say that this event will cause the application to quit when the button it is hooked up to is clicked. And that's good enough for our comment for this. So how do we quit? What is the code for that? It's a very simple one line of code, and I recommend that you memorize it, write it down, because you're going to use it in pretty much every single program you make for SGD 113 at least, because you almost always need to have a quit button somewhere in your project. So to quit, it's just application, and notice that we are getting autocompletes, and I do recommend using the autocompletes to make sure that you are spelling things correctly. So application dot quit, parentheses, semicolon, and that's it. That is the entire code to make your quit button work. One thing though is we will not be able to test if our quit button is working until we do a build. And there's going to be a separate video that's going to teach you how to build out your Unity projects. But we do want to be able to tell if we are registering a button click event. So what I recommend is that we add an extra line of code before we do our quit, where we're just printing to the console that the quit button has been clicked, so that we can register that we did do the Unity editor part correctly. So we'll just do a print, and we'll say quit button clicked, so that we can check the console when we're clicking on our button to see if it's registering correctly, since this won't be testable until we do our build. Last thing is we do need to make sure we save our script. We know that we haven't done that yet because we can see the little asterisk up here on this tab right next to the name of it. Control S to save, or you can click the save button. You do so many saves that it is just a good habit to get into with pressing Control S on the keyboard. Once that's saved, we can now hop over to Unity and get our button hooked up. First thing to remember with hooking up scripts in Unity is that it needs to be somewhere in your hierarchy panel, somewhere in the scene. If you don't have your script hooked up to something, it's not ever going to fire when you play your scene. So for stuff like UI, I recommend making a new empty game object and just using that to hold your UI script. So to do that, we just right click in an empty spot in our hierarchy, and we're going to create an empty. And it makes this game object. And we don't really want to keep it called game object because it's not really descriptive on what that is. So I'm going to actually come over here and rename it from game object to UI controller to kind of match that this is going to hold our UI controller script. Maybe you call it game controller, maybe you call it something similar, but UI controller, it's a little bit more obvious what this is for. Once I have my new game object, and again, it's not like a specific object here to create, it's just an empty object that I renamed. Once that's created, if I have it selected, I can just drag and drop my UI controller script on there, and we're good to go. As far as getting it in our scene, there's a couple other steps we have to do, but we are finally ready to hook up our button. We do need to hook up that event to the button. It doesn't know yet what we want to have happen if we click on that. In fact, if we hit play, we click it, we're not getting anything in our console because we haven't hooked it up yet. So once it's in our scene, the next step is going to be to hook up our button to that script. To do that, select your button, and in the inspector, locate this area here underneath the button. We see we have this on-click event. It's like this list right here. It should say list is empty. And this is where we're going to tell it what should happen when this button is clicked. To do that, we first hit the plus to add an event, and then we need to tell it first where in our scene is the script that contains the event we want to run. And if you remember, that's this UI controller right here. If you want, we could either click and drag that into where it says none, or we can click the circle and locate it in our scene. Make sure you do click that scenes don't find it in the assets. Like, do not find the script and drop it in. It's not going to work. We have to find the object in our scene that is holding the script, and that is our UI controller. So that's this right there. So I'll just double click that, and then we can tell it where that script is on there. So we click where it says no function. We find our UI controller script. That's that part we did in Visual Studio. And then we have to locate the on quit button click event. If you don't see this, or this is not here for some reason, it's something else strange, make sure you didn't accidentally grab the script in your assets folder and drop it on. That does not work, so don't try it. This has to be the object in the scene that holds the script. So this is that UI controller object I created. That's just an empty game object, and I dropped the script on it. I then went to the quit button and I clicked that plus and I put that UI controller object in this slot. You can either just drag it in from the hierarchy or click this button and locate it in the Scenes tab, not Assets, Scenes. Then we can find our UI controller script and find the on quit button click function. If you did hook it up correctly and it's still not there, make sure that you made this a public function. You do have to explicitly type public. You can't just leave it blank, and not a private one. So we have that right there. Then you're good to go. We can test this out since we did put that right to console when that's clicked. We can hit play and we can click on our quit button. And notice it does give us that message in the console saying the quit button has been clicked, and we can click this as many times as we want. It doesn't actually quit out because we really would not want our Unity editor to close when we do that, so it's kind of purposefully disabled on the back end. But the next video will be on how to build this and how to build it out correctly for how we want it done in SGD 113. If you're watching this for another class, your instructor most likely has other settings that they would probably want you to do. But we'll talk next about how to make a build.